Hi, I'm Dino Bob, and it's time to start a new park, Atebeno Park. It's an alpha build, and as usual, I will start with the entrance plaza. You can see I'm currently leaving the actual entrance building pretty plain and basic. Um, I'm going to turn around here and try and get a view of what our arriving guests can see so far. So we have a lovely lane that is planted with tropical plants and trees, which provide nice shade there. And you've already caught a glimpse of the building to the left. Um, the functional part of this building will be a pair of T-Rex cafes. Um, it's concrete right now. I really would prefer it to be adobe. And when coloring comes into the game, maybe I can fix that. So let's slide in a little closer and look at the portico on the lower level. You can see it goes down there to a curved wall and around the corner. And right here is a simulated elevator entrance, so our handicapped guests can both get up to the upper level and going still higher, going up that shaft to the VIP area and function area, which has a higher view out to sea. You can see the patios there from the cafes sticking out, also offering a view out to sea. So let's try and get the video up the stairs without hitting too many walls. I apologize, I'm still having trouble getting these things to drive correctly. Unintentional split view there. And the upper level has tarpaulins to provide shade all along the way. And then an open area, which we'll turn into. And this is a big lobby area for the cafes. Still thinking about what I might do to decorate this some more, particularly with the limited number of pieces we have. And that's a look into the cafe with the added glass fronting there. Love to be able to pull the T-Rex cafe signs to put on that wall between the two entrances. And at the end, you can look out at the unfinished park or stare at a corner of the wall. Anyway, let's see if we can push through the wall and go out to the patios. This lets you see a little bit of the construction details. And as usual, I can't go down because I'm sitting on top of the building. So no longer on top of the building. And down we go. Or in, down is what I wanted. Come on, come on, come on. You can see it's not particularly decorated. None of the guests would actually see this. And over on the back side, there's a little storage area and staff entrance. But again, no props yet to fill that out and make it alive. So let's see if we can get around the building and to the far side where the stairs come back down again from the upper level. And you can see there's a mini aviary in there. It's right now that's the only animal in the game. So guests are using the stairway pieces just fine. You can see I put doors in there. The floor level's not high enough to put in any of the other buildings, so that's all notional right now. The aviary will come back to in a speed build at the end of this video, mostly for its keeper's area. So this is going up the stairs again from the other side, and running through the wall because I can't steer, and down to the big feature of this building. If I can get the camera going, spin it around, and the big circular steps. The guests are using it, as you can see. It's made out of the round wall pieces sunk periodically. But they do kind of do that kind of janky step down. I might be able to improve that, but I don't know. I spent a lot of time building this as it is, and since this is still alpha, it may not translate at all, and I'll have to do it again. So cut my losses on that part of the build since the guests can use it. So a little bit of landscaping around the back in the aviary, and spin around to look at the park entrance. And that's pretty much what we got right now. So jumping into the speed build, I'm going to build a keeper's area to add to the mini aviary. You can see I've already done fencing around. Haven't made a decision yet about whether I will customize it, changing it to the null set and building my own enclosure. I do like the fact that the microraptors will perch on the mesh, and that gives a coolness to it. And when you put it to the null set, that animation goes away. So I'm building it, this edition, as more or less a little shack, and using the wonderful scaling feature to be adjusting the various building pieces so that they fit the space I'm allotting it in this area. So the height obviously is not right if I want to have a roof that slants to complement the slant of the cage. The angle won't be exactly the same, but and of course, having played with the scaling on the walls, I have to do the same for this slanted piece that will hold the wall. And you'll note that when you change the length, the slope changes pretty dramatically. And that is something you have to keep an eye on if you're going to play with these kind of things. And I'm looking at it right now and fussing with where it fits next to the wall of the cage, and how it's sitting, and whether it's scaled right to the wall segment that's there. And as you can see, it goes into the cage a little bit, but that's okay. I'll take care of that in a later part of the build. So there's the basic structure. And you know, it's nothing terribly fancy. I'm assuming that this would be built during the early stages of the park, and this would be a time when there are an awful lot of sunk costs for whoever owns this zoo, and they're only going to have so much money to throw to a build. So if you're playing in challenge mode, that will matter to you. If you're playing in sandbox, it won't, and you could, you know, jump right to what would probably be later in the zoo's life, where they would renovate this area and make it prettier looking. So because the walls scale, the doorway scale too, and that makes the doorway piece not suitable for this. I'm working here to keep the door that's in the mini aviary open and accessible, rather than being covered over with modular material, on the theory that ultimately when there are keepers, that would need to be open anyway. And that, of course, as you can see, I wasn't paying enough attention and forgot to duplicate before I moved and size it all to the partial wall. So I have to rebuild that back wall. I do that all too often. With my basic walls in place and sized to more or less the right height, it's time to play with the roof. So again, bringing in a relatively simple one. It turns out, having resized the slope wall section, it no longer wants to play real well with the roof section, particularly because, as you can see, I'm playing with the size of the roof section and discovering that very fact. And I actually have to change the rotation once I get something that I think is the right size. And then I discovered that it wasn't the right size, so I resized it again. And again, I had to change the rotation. I got to say, I'm not terribly fond of the look of the edge of the wall pieces because they are essentially squared off so that you can use these in a line and you don't see those edges. But when those edges are raw, it doesn't really look like a real roof. There is no, you don't have that slight overhang of the surfacing material over the fascia on the side. It kind of looks more like a piece of surface plywood than an actual roof made of the various layers that actual roofs are made out of. So brought in a door, a little industrial looking, because this should be park facilities kind of thing. I'm not going to go through the trouble of spelling out staff only and making it tiny to fit on that door. The door does have a lock on it, and I'm going to leave that to keeping the guests from going in. And my usual trick of using a window to be the door frame, since we don't have dedicated door frames. Always spend time fussing to get the shape right. So the door alone is not enough to make this something better than just a plain box. So I decided, even though we don't have any animal decoration stuff, that I would add something that I would envision being a bulletin board where updates on the individual animals in this mini aviary could be placed and stuff. So I started out with a piece of wall to be the corkboard bit, if you will, and as another window frame to set it off and close it. And decided I didn't like what the first pieces of wood looked like, so I changed it out for concrete. Even though wouldn't be concrete in this application, and adjusted the height of the window to a little more readable height for the guests going by. And then it was time to trim out bits of the building, and using one of the planks, something to close off that edge, which was just bugging me. And we don't have gutters or anything to put on yet, so I just decided to go with a wooden trim with the idea that the gutter material would be hidden. Or I will get gutters as props at some point, and I'll be able to put something like that in. But still not satisfied with the plain box look of it. I decided that I ought to add some corner trimmings. So the next section is me using the square column and sizing it to suitable sizes and setting it to run around at the 4 quarters. And moving those, it doesn't start till I get satisfied with how big the element is. Both its height and its width, and how it shows against the wall. It's amazing what a difference putting that kind of framing on it does to the overall effect of the building. With the higher walls on this side of the keeper structure, I decided to wait till I had all 3 in place before making them taller to fit with that. And as you can see, it showed up on the corner one that the angled piece wasn't quite set at the same level as the wall, and that needed an adjustment. So looking at it from the exhibit side, I could see that there wasn't a good mesh at the top. So I grabbed another piece and made it bigger to work as a header, because that'll be visible as you look from the other side of the mini exhibit, and wanted to conceal a little bit better the area where the keeper's roof and the mini aviary met. And you can see that I've got that block showing through there, which I didn't like, but it's where it needed to be to block from the other side of the exhibit. So I decided to add a small piece of roofing, sort of flashing, if you will, to the top of the roof. I didn't want it to have a full thickness, and I didn't want to mess with resizing to change its shape. So I just, sank it in there, and it's not terribly noticeable where it overlaps on the main roof piece. And unsatisfied with that, I fiddled with the roof piece again, and brought it up to a similar position, and less of an overhang, because I was deciding that didn't make a ton of sense and didn't do much for things. And that resulted in columns being a little big. So these kind of adjustments are things you're almost always having to make as you build on the fly, and find out what the pieces are actually doing. So because I built the standoff fence for the guests at the very beginning, it goes through the building, which is not suitable. So I removed two of the pieces and took one of the last ones and made it a little bit longer to fill up the space. The idea being that I needed that space in there. It dawned on me that I wanted this to be something functional for the animals as well, particularly a nesting box. And so I had to partition off a section of the interior there, and that's what I'm doing, using the other wooden wall piece just to make it different, and trying to decide just how much is a good amount inside the building to represent what this would be, and still leave a keeper space to work with it. Because if there is a nesting box, someone's going to be checking the eggs. Because it's going to be important to know whether the embryos are developing correctly, or whether the egg is dead, which means the keeper will need to have access to that from the keeper's side, rather than sticking his hand blindly through a hole from the animal side. So got the wall in place. That's looking okay. And obviously it needs some flooring, and it would need probably a work table. So work table first, using the slats and setting them in and squishing them down so that there's minimal open space, and setting it in place there. I think ultimately I ended up putting it a little low, but since this will hardly ever be seen, we're just going to trust my memory to come back and fix it. So onto the floor, concrete. Again, it's easy to clean, and should some animal get loose in there, it'll be easier to clean up after it. Modern dinosaurs get very excited when they're trapped in a tight space, can't get away, and they often try to lighten the load so that they can fly faster, and it makes a mess. So you'd want this to be cleanable pretty easily. No guarantee Microraptors did that, but modern zoo is going to at least start by following modern zoo practice in order to take care of their animals. So the outside's looking pretty good. reasonably happy with it. And now I'm going to have to put in the access holes for the animals to use those nesting boxes. And I'll do that when I finish fiddling with things, like making an inside version of the door, because it can be seen through the mesh of the door in the mini aviary. So to make those windows for the, or entries actually, for the Microraptors into the nesting boxes, I'm going to use windows. I'd rather have a flat black circle, but that's not accessible at the moment. So we'll use the dark window and shrink it down to a Microraptor size. It may be too big for these guys at this point, but it has to be a certain size to be visible to people moving through the park on their computers so they can see it. And then make a perch so the animal has a place to land prior to entering the box, and double it for the other one. And there you go. It looks fairly decent. It's very visible from outside. And that means I have to have keeper access to these boxes so they can do those eggs check. Yeah, having trouble with my voice today. Can do those egg checks. Apparently I cannot say that one time fast. So taking a regular door, since we have no compartment door type things, and playing with its proportions, I can get it to look a little bit like a cabinet door rather than a people door. And I can also have a lot of trouble getting it lined up and straight and getting the latch on the side I want it on. But once I get that and get focused in on it, it's easy enough to duplicate and get the second door in. And then I need to check heights to make sure they're reasonable. And when I do that, I see I managed to get them quite different heights. They've got to be a good height for the keeper to get into. So sometimes driving this thing and getting it in tight spaces is a pain in the butt. So pull that up a little bit. The keeper's probably going to have to reach up to get it, but maybe they have a little stool they can stand on or something. And then check the other side, and it's still a little high, so I'll pull that down a little further. Now, I'm imagining the Microraptors really don't want to nest too close to the ground. And there we go. So, yeah, that was that roof piece I mentioned earlier. That's pretty much all it needs for a basic presence. And checking things, making sure things are where they should be as opposed to where I thought they were going to be. There we go. That's much better. And having done that, there's sort of one other thing left to do to finish this exhibit, and that's the information signs. And once again, in alpha, we don't have those yet, so I'm going to use the windows as a stand-in. The dark glass of the eventually lighted windows is a fair stand-in for a screen that is powered down. So you see me fiddle with those guys and set up one on each of those sides that doesn't have the habitat keeper area. And so that's pretty much this build for this initial welcome to the park. And we'll go out on a little bit of watching the guests move and taking an overview of what's been done. I didn't try to record the building because it's quite large, and I was making it up as I went along at the time, and it would have been a much, much longer video if I had even done that as a speed build. So you'll get to see some speed builds for some smaller structures in the next video, because from here I need to move on to the other side of the entrance area, where I'll be introducing several new guest facilities, both functional in-game and notional in-game. But oh, there's one of two of the microraptors were perching on the screen there. Again, the reason why I left it with the standard framework. So I'm reasonably happy with this as a simple build. It's nothing earth-shattering. It's not going to win any architectural awards, but it is a functional and nice little habitat for the animals. With the guests going by, you can see the information board is at a good height, and that would function reasonably well. So that's pretty much, like I said before, going to be it for this build. Just a little bit of look at the people coming through the park and walking through the spaces. And the glitch I hit, the plants inside the upper story there were too tall, and guests were walking up them and teleporting through the roof and strolling about on top of the roof. Not an intended effect. Anyway, so this is Dino Bob. Like it if you thought this was a good video, and subscribe if you'd like to see more. And I will see you in another video.